When I saw the car, I stopped walking for a moment. I simply stood there in my daughter's driveway, staring at a brand new luxury sedan shining under the afternoon sun. It looked like something you would see in a magazine, not parked outside. The home of someone who had recently told me she was struggling to keep up with monthly bills. My daughter noticed me looking. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said with a smile. I forced a smile back, but something inside me felt uneasy. Just 3 months earlier, I had asked her about my retirement savings. Those savings were not just numbers on a screen. They were the result of 40 years of hard work, missed vacations, overtime shifts, and careful budgeting. When I asked if everything was safe, she looked me in the eye and said, "Mom, don't worry, your money is secure." I trusted her completely. But as I looked at that expensive car, one question kept repeating in my mind. How could she afford it? Her salary had never been enough for a purchase like that. In fact, she had recently complained about rising expenses and financial stress. The numbers simply did not make sense. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation. I wanted to believe my daughter would never betray my trust. But deep down, a quiet voice was telling me that something was terribly wrong, and I was about to discover a truth that would change our relationship forever. Hello, my dear friends, and welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, thank you for stopping by and spending a little of your day with me. This is a place where we share real-life stories about family, love, trust, heartbreak, and the lessons life teaches us along the way. Some stories make us smile, while others remind us how strong we can be during difficult times. Before we continue, I would like to ask for a small favor. If you enjoy heartfelt stories like this one, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these meaningful stories with people around the world. And if something in today's story speaks to your heart, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let me tell you how the retirement savings I spent a lifetime building nearly disappeared without me realizing it. I retired at 67. Even now, saying those words feels strange. For most of my life, I woke up before sunrise, got dressed, and went to work. My routine hardly changed for decades. Some mornings were difficult, some days felt endless, but I kept going because I had responsibilities, bills to pay, and a future to prepare for. Like many people of my generation, I believed in saving for retirement little by little. I was never rich. I never earned a huge salary. There were no sudden windfalls or lucky breaks. Every dollar in my retirement account came from years of careful planning and sacrifice. When my friends took expensive vacations, I often stayed home. When others upgraded their cars every few years, I kept driving mine. When I wanted to buy something nice for myself, I usually asked the same question: do I really need it? Most of the time, the answer was no. Over the years, those small decisions added up. Slowly, my retirement savings grew. It wasn't enough to make me wealthy, but it was enough to give me peace of mind. Or at least, that's what I thought. After retiring, life became much quieter. I spent more time reading books, tending to my small garden, and visiting family whenever I could. I enjoyed simple things: a cup of coffee on the porch, watching birds in the morning, long phone calls with old friends. Those moments meant more to me than expensive possessions ever could. But one thing I struggled with was technology. The world seemed to change overnight. Banking was no longer done at a local branch. Everything moved online. Investments were managed through apps and websites. Statements arrived by email instead of regular mail. To be honest, it overwhelmed me. I could still use a computer for basic things, but every year the system seemed more complicated. That's where my daughter came in. Emily had always been good with technology. She could solve computer problems in minutes that would leave me frustrated for hours. Whenever I had trouble with my phone, she was the first person I called. "Mom," she would laugh, "you're making this harder than it needs to be." Then she'd tap a few buttons and magically fix everything. I trusted her, not just because she understood technology. I trusted her because she was my daughter. I remembered holding her when she was a baby. I remembered helping her learn to ride a bicycle. I remembered staying awake all night when she had a fever. I remembered working extra shifts so she could attend college without worrying about tuition. A mother's trust doesn't appear overnight. It's built over a lifetime. One afternoon, about 2 years after I retired, Emily came over for lunch. We sat at my kitchen table eating sandwiches while sunlight streamed through the window. The conversation eventually turned to finances. Mom, she said gently, have you checked your investment accounts recently? I shook my head. Not really. You should keep a closer eye on them. I sighed. I know I should, but every time I try to log in, I get confused. Emily smiled. I can help. At the time, her offer felt like a blessing. She explained how modern investment platforms worked. She talked about digital statements, account dashboards, and security features. Most of it sounded like a foreign language to me. Eventually, she suggested helping me manage the online side of things, not control my money, just help monitor it. At least, that's how it started. For months, everything seemed perfectly normal. Whenever I had questions, she answered them. Whenever a statement arrived electronically, she reviewed it with me. If there was paperwork to complete, she helped me understand it. I felt relieved. For the first time in years, I wasn't stressed about technology. One evening, we sat together looking at my account information. Everything looks good, she said. Are you sure? She nodded confidently. Absolutely. Your retirement savings are safe. Those words stayed with me. Your retirement savings are safe. Simple words. Comforting words. Words I would remember much later. As time passed, I stopped checking the account myself. Not because I didn't care, because I trusted her. Whenever I asked about the balance, she reassured me. Whenever market news appeared on television, she explained what was happening. In early 2026, financial news became especially unsettling. Every day, reporters talked about market volatility. Prices rose and fell. Experts argued about economic uncertainty. Naturally, I became worried. One afternoon, I called Emily. Honey, should I be concerned about my retirement account? There was a brief pause. Then she answered calmly, No, Mom, everything is under control. Are you sure? Yes, the funds are secure. Don't stress yourself. Her confidence immediately eased my fears. After all, she understood these things better than I did. At least that's what I believed. Around that same time, I began noticing small changes, nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just little things that felt unusual. When I asked about account statements, they sometimes arrived later than expected. If I requested specific information, she often said she would send it later. Sometimes later became days, sometimes it became weeks. Whenever I followed up, there was always a reason. Work had been busy. She forgot. The system was updating. The statement hadn't arrived yet. The explanations sounded reasonable. At least at first. I told myself not to overthink it. Everyone gets busy, everyone forgets things. Occasionally, still, a tiny feeling of discomfort began growing in the back of my mind. I tried ignoring it. After all, Emily had always been a good daughter. Growing up, she was kind and responsible. She wasn't perfect. But who is? I remembered school plays where she nervously searched for me in the audience. I remembered college graduation day. I remembered the tears in her eyes when she got married. Those memories made it difficult to question her. Whenever doubt appeared, those memories pushed it away. Then there were the phone calls. At first, we spoke almost every day. Gradually, the conversations became shorter. She always sounded distracted, always rushing somewhere, always dealing with something urgent. Can I call you back, Mom? That phrase became increasingly common. Of course, I understood. She had her own life, her own responsibilities. Still, something felt different. One evening, I sat alone in my living room watching television. The news was discussing retirement planning. The host talked about the importance of reviewing financial accounts regularly. As I listened, I realized something. I hadn't personally reviewed my account in months. The thought bothered me. The next morning, I called Emily. Honey, could we sit down sometime this week and go through everything together? There was another pause, longer than usual. Then she answered, Of course, Mom. Just not this week. Things are crazy at work. Maybe next week. Sure. But next week came and went. Then another week passed. Then another. Life continued moving forward. I kept telling myself there was nothing to worry about. Yet the uneasy feeling remained. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was more like standing outside before a storm arrives. The sky still looks clear, the wind is calm, but somehow you know the weather is changing. I couldn't explain why I felt that way. I only knew that something had shifted. Something I couldn't yet see. A few days later, while checking my email, I noticed a financial notification I didn't recognize. Normally, messages like that went directly to Emily's attention, but this one had arrived in my inbox. I stared at the subject line. My heart began beating a little faster. At that moment, I had no idea that one simple notification would start unraveling a truth I never wanted to discover, and before long, I would find myself standing in a driveway, staring at a luxury car that would make all my fears impossible to ignore. A few days after I noticed that strange financial notification, Emily invited me to her house for a family barbecue. It was a Saturday afternoon. The weather was beautiful. The sky was clear, and a gentle breeze moved through the neighborhood trees. I remember feeling grateful for the invitation. Lately, it seemed like everyone was busy, and family gatherings had become less frequent than they used to be. I baked a peach pie that morning, one of Emily's favorites from childhood. When she was young, she used to sit on a stool in my kitchen and help me peel peaches. Most of the fruit never made it into the pie because she would eat half of it before I could stop her. Those memories still made me smile. As I drove toward her house, I found myself looking forward to spending time with my daughter, my son-in-law, and the grandchildren. For a while, I forgot all about the strange email notification. I forgot about the delayed account statements. I forgot about the uneasy feeling that had been following me for weeks. I simply wanted to enjoy a day with family. When I turned onto her street, everything seemed perfectly normal. Children were riding bicycles, neighbors were mowing their lawns, a few people were walking their dogs. It was the kind of peaceful suburban neighborhood where nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen. Then I pulled into Emily's driveway, and that's when I saw it. First, I thought I had parked at the wrong house. Sitting near the garage was a vehicle unlike anything I had ever seen in person. It was sleek, elegant, expensive. Its metallic paint reflected the sunlight like a mirror. The wheels looked larger than those on most cars. The windows were tinted. Every detail seemed designed to attract attention. For a few seconds, I simply stared. I wasn't a car expert. Never had been. But even I knew this wasn't an ordinary vehicle. This was luxury. The kind of luxury most people only dream about owning. I slowly stepped out of my car. The peach pie suddenly felt heavy in my hands. As I walked toward the house, I couldn't stop looking at the vehicle. A temporary registration tag was attached to the back, brand new. Not even permanently registered yet. I reached the front door just as Emily opened it. Mom, she said cheerfully. She gave me a hug. I hugged her back. Then I nodded toward the driveway. Is that yours? Her face immediately brightened. Oh, you saw it. She sounded excited. Proud. Like a child showing off a new bicycle. It's beautiful, I said. And honestly, it was. She smiled. I just got it last week. I looked back toward the driveway. Last week. The words echoed in my mind. That's quite a car. It is. Isn't it? There was nothing unusual about her response. Nothing suspicious. At least not yet. Still, something felt strange. As we walked inside, I found myself doing mental calculations. Not intentionally. The numbers simply appeared in my head. Emily had often talked about financial struggles. She wasn't poor, but she certainly wasn't wealthy. Just a few months earlier, she had complained about rising grocery prices. She had mentioned concerns about mortgage payments. She had even joked that she needed a second job to keep up with expenses. Now she owned a luxury vehicle. A very expensive luxury vehicle. The math didn't seem to fit inside the house. Family members were already gathering. The grandchildren ran through the living room laughing. My son-in-law was carrying food to the backyard. Music played softly in the background. Everyone seemed happy. I tried to focus on the moment, but my attention kept drifting back to the car. During lunch, I finally asked another question. So, what made you decide to buy a new vehicle? Emily smiled. I've been wanting one for a while. That's wonderful. Then I added carefully, it must have cost quite a bit. For the briefest moment, her smile faded only for a second, then it returned. I got a good deal. A good deal. It wasn't really an answer. I noticed she immediately changed the subject. She asked one of the children about school. Everyone began talking about summer plans. The conversation moved on, but my question remained unanswered. Later, that afternoon, I stepped outside to get some fresh air. The luxury sedan sat quietly in the driveway. Up close, it looked even more impressive. The interior appeared immaculate. Large digital screens stretched across the dashboard. The seats looked softer than my living room furniture. Everything about it spoke of money. A lot of money. I stood there studying it. Not because I was jealous. I wasn't. If Emily had genuinely achieved financial success, I would have been proud, very proud. Every parent wants their child to do well, but something about the situation felt wrong. As I stood there, a neighbor walked by. Beautiful car. Isn't it? He said. It certainly is. He laughed. Your daughter must be doing very well these days. I forced a smile. Maybe she is. But inside, my uncertainty deepened. A little while later, Emily joined me outside. She noticed me looking at the vehicle again. You like it? I do. Then I paused. Honey, if you don't mind me asking, how exactly were you able to afford something like this? The question hung in the air. For a moment, she didn't answer. Instead, she crossed her arms and looked away. It was a small reaction, one most people probably wouldn't have noticed, but mothers notice things, especially when it comes to their children. Finally, she spoke. Work has been going well. That's wonderful. She nodded. Yeah, things have improved. I waited for more. Nothing came. No explanation. No details. Just vague statements. I felt my stomach tighten. Years of being a parent had taught me something important. People who are telling the truth usually don't mind explaining. People who are hiding something often prefer general answers. Again, I pushed the thought away. I didn't want to assume the worst. I didn't want to become suspicious of my own daughter, but the questions kept growing. That evening, after everyone left, I drove home alone. The entire ride, I couldn't stop thinking. I replayed every conversation from the day, every answer, every hesitation, every avoided detail. The more I thought about it, the less comfortable I felt. When I arrived home, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my favorite chair. The house was quiet, too quiet. The image of that luxury car remained fixed in my mind. Then another thought appeared. The strange financial notification. I hadn't thought much about it before. Now, it seemed important. Very important. I opened my laptop. The old machine hummed to life. For a moment, I considered closing it again. Perhaps I was imagining things. Perhaps there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Perhaps I was letting anxiety cloud my judgment. But another voice inside me spoke up. A calm voice. A practical voice. The voice that had helped me survive difficult times throughout my life. That voice said something simple. Check. Just check. No accusations. No assumptions. Just look at the facts. I stared at the screen. My hands felt strangely cold. For years, I had trusted Emily completely with the online side of my retirement savings. I had rarely questioned her, rarely asked for proof, rarely looked for myself. Now, for the first time in a long time, I felt an urgent need to see everything with my own eyes. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Tonight. Because whether I wanted to admit it or not, a terrible possibility had begun forming in my mind, and if that possibility was true, then the beautiful car sitting in my daughter's driveway was not a symbol of success. It was evidence of something far more painful, something I was not prepared to face. With my heart pounding, I reached for my account information and prepared to log in. I had no idea that what I was about to discover would change my life forever. I sat alone in my living room staring at my laptop screen. Outside, the evening had grown quiet. The last light of the day was disappearing behind the trees, and the house felt unusually still. Normally, I enjoyed that kind of silence, but that night, the silence felt heavy. My hands trembled slightly as I entered my account information. It took me several attempts. I had not logged into the retirement account myself in a very long time. Emily usually handled everything. Whenever I needed information, I simply called her. That arrangement had once felt convenient. Now it felt reckless. After a few moments, an error message appeared. Incorrect password. I frowned. I tried again. Another error. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. The password should have worked. I had written it down carefully. Unless it had been changed. I stared at the screen. Why would it be changed? Perhaps the company required a security update. Perhaps Emily had updated it and forgotten to tell me. There were innocent explanations. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Still, the uneasy feeling continued to grow. The next morning, I called Emily. She answered on the third ring. Hi, Mom. Good morning, sweetheart. She sounded distracted. I could hear office noises in the background. Everything okay? I hesitated. Then I decided to be direct. I tried logging into my retirement account last night. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Oh, the password didn't work. Another pause. I probably updated it a while back. Probably. The word caught my attention. You probably did? Yes, I'm pretty sure I did. I waited. Could you send me the new login information? Her answer came quickly. I'm in the middle of something right now. That's okay. Whenever you have time. Maybe tonight. All right. We ended the call, but something about the conversation bothered me. Emily had always been organized. Very organized. She wasn't the type of person who forgot important details, yet she suddenly seemed uncertain about changes made to my retirement account that afternoon. I kept checking my email. Nothing arrived. No login information. No message. No explanation. By evening, I decided to call again. This time the call went to voicemail. I left a polite message. An hour later, she texted. Busy. We'll call tomorrow. That was all. 3 short words. The next day came. No call. The day after that came. Still nothing. At this point, concern had become suspicion, and suspicion was slowly becoming fear. Finally, on Friday afternoon, I drove to Emily's house. I didn't tell her I was coming. I simply got in my car and went. When she opened the door, surprise flashed across her face. Mom, can we talk? Her smile looked forced. Sure. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where we had shared countless meals over the years, the same table where birthday cakes had been cut and holiday dinners had been planned. Today, it felt different, uncomfortable. I took a deep breath. Honey, I need access to my retirement account. Her expression changed immediately. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. Why? The question startled me. Why? Because it was my account. Because it was my future. Because it was my money. I just want to review everything. She looked down at the table. It's all fine. I'd still like to see it. She sighed. A long sigh. The kind people make when they're preparing for an unpleasant conversation. Mom, you're worrying for no reason. Maybe I am. I tried to keep my voice calm, but I want to look anyway. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she stood up. I'll get my laptop. When she returned, she placed it on the table and opened the account dashboard. At first glance, everything appeared normal. Charts, numbers, investment categories. The same professional-looking interface I remembered seeing years earlier. Emily turned the screen toward me. See? Everything's okay. I looked carefully. Something immediately felt wrong. The balance seemed lower than I expected. Much lower. I wasn't certain, but I knew roughly how much should have been there. Years of monitoring retirement projections had made me familiar with those numbers. My heart began beating faster. Can you show me the transaction history? Emily's face tightened. Why? Again. Why? The question felt strange. A person with nothing to hide wouldn't object to a simple request. I'd just like to review it. She didn't move. Emily. Finally, she clicked the transaction tab. Rows of entries appeared. 81st. They looked ordinary. Investment adjustments, administrative updates, market activity. Then I noticed something unusual. Several withdrawals, small ones, not enormous, but noticeable. I leaned closer. What are these? Emily quickly answered. Maintenance fees. I frowned. Maintenance fees? Yes, something didn't seem right. The retirement account had never charged fees that large before. I continued scrolling. More withdrawals appeared. Then more. Then more. My chest tightened. Some were labeled with descriptions I didn't recognize. Others were listed as transfers. The amounts varied. A few $100s here. 1,000 there. Several thousand elsewhere. Individually, they might not have attracted attention. Together, they formed a pattern. A very disturbing pattern. I looked at my daughter. What am I looking at? She didn't answer. I continued scrolling. Month after month. Transfer after transfer. Withdrawal after withdrawal. The numbers kept appearing. Each one felt like a small crack forming in the foundation of everything I believed. My hands began to shake. Emily. Still no response. Emily. Tell me what these are. She stared at the table. The silence was unbearable. Then I found a transaction that made my stomach drop. The amount was much larger than the others. Far larger. I blinked. Read it again. Then, read it a third time. Surely I had misunderstood. Surely there was some mistake. But the number remained exactly the same. A substantial sum had left my retirement account. My retirement account. I felt as though the room had suddenly become smaller, harder to breathe in, harder to think in. I slowly turned toward my daughter. Tell me this isn't what it looks like. Her eyes filled with tears. That was the moment everything changed. Because until then, part of me had still been searching for an innocent explanation, a technical error, a misunderstanding, a mistake. But tears do not appear when someone is explaining a harmless accounting issue. Tears appear when the truth is finally cornered, and in that moment, I knew. I knew before she said a single word. The money had not disappeared accidentally. The transfers had not been mistakes. The withdrawals had not been administrative fees. My daughter had taken money from my retirement savings. The realization felt like a physical blow. Not because of the dollars involved. Not yet. At that moment. The amount didn't matter. What hurt was understanding that the person I trusted most had been hiding something from me. A person can recover from financial loss. Money can sometimes be earned again. But trust is different. Trust takes years to build, and only moments to break. Emily wiped her eyes. Mom. Her voice cracked. I looked at her quietly, waiting. Fear and sadness mixed together inside me. Part of me wanted her to deny everything. Part of me wanted this nightmare to end. Instead, she lowered her head, and the first words of her confession began to emerge. Mom, Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. The kitchen felt completely silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed louder than usual. I sat across from my daughter, waiting for her to explain what I had just discovered. My heart was pounding, so hard that I could feel it in my chest. For a moment, she couldn't look at me. Instead, she stared at the table. At the wood grain. At her folded hands, anywhere except my face. Finally, she spoke. I was going to put it back. The words landed heavily between us. Not because they surprised me, but because they confirmed everything I had feared. I closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them again, I felt older than I had that morning. What do you mean you were going to put it back? Tears rolled down her cheeks. I borrowed it. Borrowed. That word hurt almost as much as the truth itself. People borrow things with permission. They borrow books. They borrow tools. They borrow money after asking. What Emily had done wasn't borrowing. She knew it, and I knew it. Yet neither of us said it out loud. I simply listened. The story came slowly at first. Broken pieces. Half-finished explanations. Fragments of poor decisions. A few years earlier, she and her husband had begun experiencing financial pressure. At first, it was normal household stress, unexpected repairs, higher living costs, credit card balances, rising mortgage payments. Nothing unusual, nothing impossible to overcome, but instead of reducing expenses, Emily tried to maintain the lifestyle she had become accustomed to. Whenever money became tight, she convinced herself things would improve soon. She believed future raises would solve the problem. She believed future opportunities would fix everything. She believed tomorrow would somehow rescue today's mistakes. Unfortunately, tomorrow never arrived. The debt continued growing. Little by little. Month by month, until it became something she could no longer ignore. Why didn't you tell me? I asked quietly. She wiped her eyes. I was embarrassed. I looked at her. For the first time that afternoon, I noticed how exhausted she seemed. The confident smile she usually wore was gone. The carefully maintained image had disappeared. In its place sat a frightened woman who had spent months carrying a secret. I didn't want you to think I was failing. My heart ached hearing that, not because it excused her actions. It didn't, but because I understood the fear behind those words. Parents often worry about disappointing their children. What we don't always realize is that children sometimes spend their entire lives worrying about disappointing us. I never expected perfection from you. I know. Then why? She looked away, and that's when the full truth finally emerged. 81st, she withdrew a small amount, just enough to solve an immediate problem. She told herself she would replace it within weeks. And no harm done. And no one would know. Then another emergency appeared. Then another. Each time, she promised herself it was temporary. Each time, she believed she was only borrowing. Eventually, taking money became easier. Not because she was heartless, because she had become comfortable with her own excuses. One bad decision created another. Then another. Then another. until she stopped seeing them as bad decisions at all. They became solutions, temporary solutions, dangerous solutions, but solutions nonetheless. The money wasn't used only for emergencies. That was the part that hurt most. Some of it went toward debt, some toward bills, but not all of it. Not even close. As the conversation continued, I learned about expensive vacations, designer handbags, luxury purchases, weekend trips, restaurant bills, things she convinced herself she deserved after working hard, things she couldn't truly afford. And then there was the car, the beautiful luxury vehicle sitting in the driveway, the same vehicle that had first sparked my suspicion. I looked directly at her. The car. She nodded. Fresh tears appeared. Part of the down payment had come from my retirement savings. The room felt colder for a few moments. Neither of us spoke. I remembered standing in the driveway admiring that car. I remembered feeling proud. I remembered wondering whether my daughter had finally achieved a level of success she had always dreamed about. Now I understood. The car wasn't a symbol of success. It was a symbol of deception. Strangely, I didn't feel angry. At least not the kind of anger people expect. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't slamming doors. I wasn't demanding revenge. Instead, I felt something much heavier. Sadness. A deep, exhausting sadness. The kind that settles into your bones. The kind that leaves you staring out windows at night. The kind that makes familiar places feel unfamiliar. I thought about all the years I spent saving, the overtime shifts, the missed opportunities, the sacrifices. I remembered saying no to vacations because retirement mattered more. I remembered postponing purchases because future security mattered more. Every dollar represented time. Years of my life. Years I could never get back. And now some of that time had been exchanged for luxury items and lifestyle upgrades. That realization hurt more than any number ever could. Did you ever plan to tell me? Emily hesitated, then she shook her head. The answer was honest. Painful, but honest. I kept thinking I'd fix it first. Fix it first. Another promise to herself. Another delay. Another excuse. Months had become years, and the problem had continued growing. Eventually, her husband entered the kitchen. He had apparently overheard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. The expression on his face told me everything. Shock, confusion, disappointment. It quickly became clear that he hadn't known the full extent of what Emily had done. Some of the withdrawals had been hidden from him too. The secret wasn't only hurting me. It was hurting her marriage, her family, her own peace of mind. The fallout stretched much further than I realized. That evening, I left shortly before sunset. The drive home felt endless. I barely turned on the radio. I barely noticed the traffic. My mind kept replaying the conversation, every explanation, every confession, every tear. When I finally arrived home, I sat in the dark living room for a long time. I didn't cry immediately. The tears came later, hours later, after the shock had settled, after reality had fully arrived. I cried for the money, but mostly, I cried for the trust. Trust is a fragile thing. When children are young, parents spend years teaching them honesty, integrity, responsibility. We hope those lessons stay with them forever. When they don't, it feels like losing something precious, something invisible, something impossible to measure. That night, sleep never came. I walked through the house remembering different stages of Emily's life. Her first day of school, her graduation, her wedding, the birth of my grandchildren. Every memory felt connected to the woman she had become. A woman I still loved deeply. A woman who had also betrayed me. Both things were true. And accepting both truths at the same time was incredibly difficult. Just before sunrise, I opened the transaction records again. For the first time, I added everything together carefully. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every hidden movement of money. The total slowly appeared on the screen. My stomach dropped because the final amount missing was far worse than I had imagined. And in that moment, I realized that recovering emotionally would be difficult, but recovering financially might be even harder. The sun was just beginning to rise when I finished adding up the numbers. I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the final total on my laptop screen. For several minutes, I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I couldn't even fully process what I was seeing. The amount was far larger than I had expected. When I first discovered the withdrawals, I imagined a few $1,000s, perhaps even tens of thousands. The reality was much worse. Years of careful saving had been damaged. Not destroyed completely, but damaged enough to change the future I had planned for myself. I leaned back in my chair and covered my face with my hands. The house was quiet. Outside, birds were beginning their morning songs ordinarily. I loved that sound, that morning. It felt strangely distant. All I could think about was the number on the screen. Not because I was greedy, not because I cared more about money than family, but because retirement savings are not just money. They represent security. They represent peace of mind. They represent the ability to live without fear during the final chapter of life. And suddenly, part of that security was gone. For the first time since retiring, I felt genuinely afraid. I began reviewing my monthly expenses, property taxes, utilities, insurance, medical costs, groceries. Everything that once felt manageable suddenly looked different. I wasn't facing immediate disaster. I still had resources, but the margin of safety I had worked so hard to build had become much smaller. That realization weighed heavily on me. Over the next few days, I barely left the house. I spent hours reviewing financial documents. I called my investment company directly. For the first time in years, I handled every conversation myself. The representatives were patient and helpful. They explained account history, security settings, authorization records. Every call revealed another piece of the puzzle, and every piece confirmed the same painful truth. The withdrawals had been legitimate from the system's perspective. Emily had been granted access. The transactions had been approved through authorized credentials. Legally, the situation was complicated. Emotionally, it was devastating. A week later, I met with a financial advisor. I brought folders filled with statements and transaction histories. The advisor spent nearly 2 hours reviewing everything. When he finally looked up, his expression was sympathetic. "We can create a recovery plan." Recovery plan. I never imagined hearing those words regarding my retirement. Recovery plans were for people rebuilding after disasters, not for someone who had spent decades preparing responsibly. Still, hearing those words gave me a small sense of hope. The situation was serious, but it wasn't hopeless. We discussed ways to protect my remaining assets, new account structures, additional security measures, independent monitoring, restrictions on withdrawal authority. As he explained everything, one lesson became painfully clear. Trust and financial oversight are not the same thing. For years, I had treated them as if they were. I trusted my daughter. Therefore, I believed oversight wasn't necessary. Now I understood how dangerous that assumption could be. Even good people can make bad decisions. Even loving family members can make terrible mistakes. Protecting yourself doesn't mean you love someone less. It simply means you're being responsible. A few days later, I met with an attorney. I almost canceled the appointment several times. The thought of discussing legal action against my own daughter felt unbearable. Yet I needed answers. I needed to understand my options. The attorney listened carefully. He reviewed documents, asked questions, took notes. Then he explained the situation calmly. There were legal avenues available, potential civil claims, possible recovery efforts, different strategies depending on what outcome I wanted. As he spoke, I found myself staring out the window. My mind wasn't focused on legal terminology. It was focused on Emily, the little girl who used to hold my hand crossing the street, the teenager who called me whenever she needed advice, the young woman who cried in my arms after her first heartbreak. How had we arrived here? How had a relationship built over decades reached this point? The attorney eventually asked a simple question: "What do you want to do?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Because this wasn't just a legal decision. It was a family decision, a hard decision. And those are often the hardest decisions of all. When I returned home, several missed calls were waiting on my phone. Most were from Emily. She had been calling almost daily since our confrontation. At first, I couldn't bring myself to answer. I wasn't ready. Not because I hated her, because I was hurting. Every conversation felt exhausting. Every thought about the situation reopened the wound. Eventually, I listened to one of her voicemail messages. Her voice trembled throughout the recording. "Mom, please call me." A long pause followed. "I'm so sorry." Another pause. "I know that isn't enough. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything. But I need you to know how much I regret what I've done." By the end of the message, she was crying. I sat quietly for several minutes afterward. The apology was genuine, of that I had little doubt, but sincerity doesn't erase consequences. Regret doesn't restore trust overnight. Some damage takes much longer to repair. A few days later, I finally agreed to meet her. We chose a small park near my house, a neutral place, somewhere peaceful, somewhere without painful memories attached to it. When I arrived, Emily was already sitting on a bench. She looked tired, more tired than I had ever seen her. The confident woman who once managed everything seemed gone. In her place sat someone carrying the weight of her own choices. For a while, neither of us spoke. We simply watched children playing nearby. Finally, she broke the silence. "I don't expect forgiveness." I looked at her. "Then why are you here?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Because I need you to know that I never stopped loving you." The words hit me harder than I expected, because despite everything, I believed her. Love had never been the issue. The problem was judgment, boundaries, honesty, responsibility. People often imagine betrayal comes from hatred. Most of the time, it doesn't. Sometimes betrayal comes from selfishness, sometimes from fear, sometimes from convincing yourself that you'll fix everything before anyone gets hurt. Emily hadn't stopped loving me, she had simply stopped protecting me. And there is a difference. Over the following weeks, we continued having difficult conversations. Some ended well, others didn't. Progress was slow, painfully slow. There were days when I felt hopeful, days when I believed healing might be possible, and there were days when sadness returned without warning. A memory, a bank statement, a simple reminder of what had happened. Healing rarely moves in a straight line. I learned that firsthand. One positive step came when I removed all shared financial access. Every account was updated, every password changed, every authorization reviewed. It wasn't done out of anger. It was done out of necessity. The boundaries should have existed long ago. Now they finally did, oddly enough. Establishing those boundaries brought a sense of peace. For the first time in months, I felt some control returning to my life. The future remained uncertain. Financial recovery would take time. Emotional recovery would take even longer. But at least I was moving forward. One evening, while sitting on my porch watching the sunset, I realized something important. The money wasn't the only thing I needed to recover. I also needed to recover my confidence, my independence, my ability to trust my own judgment again, because betrayal doesn't only damage relationships. It damages the way you see yourself. And rebuilding that confidence would become one of the most important parts of my journey. The months that followed were some of the most difficult of my life, not because every day was filled with drama. In many ways, the drama had already passed. The confrontations were over. The truth had been revealed. The accounts had been secured. The damage had been measured. What remained was something quieter, something harder, learning how to live with what had happened for a long time. I woke up each morning with the same feeling sitting in my chest, a heaviness, not overwhelming, not crushing, just present, like a shadow that followed me from room to room. Some days it felt lighter, other days it felt heavier, but it was always there. First, I kept asking myself the same questions. How did I miss the warning signs? Why didn't I check the account sooner? Why was I so willing to trust without verifying? The questions never seemed to end. Eventually, however, I realized something important. No amount of replaying the past could change it. No amount of guilt could recover the lost years, and no amount of self-blame could undo the choices someone else had made. The only thing I could control was what happened next. That realization became the first step toward healing. Slowly, I began rebuilding my confidence. I started learning things I had avoided for years: online banking, account monitoring, security alerts, investment dashboards. At first, the technology still intimidated me. There were moments when I felt frustrated, moments when I wanted to give up and let someone else handle everything again, but I didn't. Instead, I kept learning, one small step at a time, one lesson at a time, one login at a time. Each success made me feel stronger. For the first time in years, I felt fully involved in my own financial life. The accounts belonged to me. The responsibility belonged to me. And surprisingly, that responsibility felt empowering rather than frightening. I also made practical changes. Every important account now required multiple forms of verification. Transaction alerts were sent directly to me. Statements arrived in several formats. Nothing happened without my knowledge. These changes weren't about suspicion. They were about transparency. Because I had learned something valuable through all of this: trust works best when it exists alongside accountability, not instead of it. One afternoon, nearly 6 months after the confrontation, Emily asked if we could have lunch together. Just the two of us. No lawyers. No financial discussions. No difficult documents sitting between us. Just lunch. I considered declining. Part of me still felt wounded. Part of me worried that seeing her would reopen old pain. But another part of me understood that avoiding someone forever is not the same thing as healing. So I agreed. We met at a small cafe near my neighborhood, the kind of place where people sat quietly reading books and drinking coffee. When Emily arrived, she looked nervous. I suppose I did too. For a few minutes, we talked about ordinary things: the grandchildren, the weather, her work, my garden. Simple topics, safe topics. Then eventually the conversation became more personal. She looked down at her coffee cup. I think about it every day. I knew exactly what she meant. I do too. Tears filled her eyes. I wish I could take it back. There was a time when hearing those words would have made me cry. Now they simply made me sad. Because some mistakes cannot be undone. They can only be acknowledged. I know, I said softly. She nodded. Neither of us spoke for a few moments. Then she asked the question I had known would eventually come. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I looked out the window before answering. People often think forgiveness happens all at once, like flipping a light switch. One moment you're angry, the next moment you're healed. That wasn't my experience. For me, forgiveness was a process, a journey, a series of choices made over time. Finally, I looked back at her. I've already started. Her face changed immediately. Relief, hope, disbelief, all at once. But I raised my hand gently. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. She nodded slowly. I know. And I believe she finally did understand. Forgiveness means letting go of the desire to punish someone forever. Trust is something entirely different. Trust must be rebuilt patiently, consistently, over time. Neither of us expected an immediate return to the relationship we once had. Some things had changed permanently, and pretending otherwise would have been dishonest, but we could still move forward. We could still create something new, a relationship built on honesty rather than assumptions, boundaries rather than blind faith, truth rather than avoidance. That felt like progress. As the seasons changed, life gradually became calmer. Financially, I continued following the recovery plan. It wasn't easy. Certain dreams had to be adjusted, certain luxuries became unnecessary, certain expectations needed to be revised, but I discovered something surprising. My happiness had never depended on the size of my account balance. The things that brought me peace remained unchanged. Morning coffee on the porch, conversations with friends, watching the sunset, listening to my grandchildren laugh, a good book, a quiet afternoon. The simple blessings were still there, and perhaps I appreciated them even more than before. Emily also worked hard to take responsibility for her actions. She sold several expensive items. She reduced unnecessary spending. She created repayment plans. Most importantly, she stopped making excuses. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, I saw genuine accountability, not because she had been forced into it, because she had finally accepted it. That mattered a great deal. One evening, nearly a year after everything unraveled, I found myself sitting on my porch again. The sky was painted with soft shades of orange and gold. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. It was one of those peaceful moments that seem ordinary while you're living them but become precious when you look back later. As I sat there, I reflected on everything that had happened: the trust, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the recovery, the forgiveness. None of it had been easy. None of it had been fair. Yet somehow, I had survived it. More than that, I had grown from it. I had learned that loving someone does not mean surrendering your boundaries. I had learned that trust should never replace accountability. I had learned that protecting yourself is not selfish. And, perhaps most importantly, I had learned that forgiveness is not weakness. Forgiveness is strength, not because it excuses wrongdoing, but because it allows you to move forward without carrying bitterness forever. If there is one lesson I hope others take from my story, it is this: love the people in your life. Trust the people who earn that trust, but never be afraid to stay involved in your own affairs. Never assume that good intentions are enough. Transparency protects relationships, honesty strengthens them, and healthy boundaries help them survive. Today, my relationship with my daughter is different than it once was. Perhaps it always will be. Some scars never disappear completely, but scars are not the same thing as open wounds. Scars remind us where we've been. They remind us what we've survived, and they remind us that healing is possible. I still love my daughter. I always will. Nothing that happened changed that. But now I understand something I wish I had understood much sooner. Loving someone and protecting yourself can exist at the same time. One does not cancel out the other. In fact, sometimes the healthiest relationships require both. And as I watched the sun slowly disappear beyond the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time: peace. Not because everything had been restored, not because every loss had been recovered, but because I had finally accepted the truth, learned the lesson, and found the strength to keep moving forward, and that, in the end, was worth more than money could ever buy.